can you create a Christian scene where there's a lot of Christians getting stoked about something like you were even with the Christian pop punk music? Can we do that to influence the world? That's my question. Welcome back, everyone, to the Shock Absorber podcast, and it is, as always, excellent to be along with you. If you are listening or watching, we're here in a different location. And a different location. Hi, Tim.
Hey,
say
hello.
hello.
Joe.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Just you and me today.
Just two of us chatting away.
Beautiful. We're exploring the space here at Miranda Congregational Church because we're in a different location. This is the third location we've filmed in. I think could be my favourite.
Okay. I do like this couch setup.
Yes, I'm
relaxed.
enjoying the couch setup.
Yeah.
I think we're moving towards, that's what we want our regular way of filming to be, is a bit more relaxed. Yeah. You can look into your eyes more easily rather than across the table. It's been lovely. How have you been? You haven't been on the podcast for a while.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks. Yeah. Yep.
I'm sure you have lots to tell us.
Oh, well, what have I been doing? There was sick one week, I think. Then we had Square One camp, which we can talk about a little bit. And then last week, we were running a bit late as a staff team, and so I had to get back to our other campus to run some kids ministry while you and Stu kicked on. And
it's a very nice way to say you don't want to be on the podcast anymore.
Well, I'm glad you invited me back. In Stu's absence, he was scratching through the list and asked everyone else, and finally came and said, I guess we'll have to ask you again.
That's not true. I like having you on the podcast. It's really good.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I hope everyone else does too. If you don't, too bad.
Too bad.
Because I like having Tim on. Tell us about Square One camp, because you've been on a Square One camp recently. Yeah. What was it like? What is it? Yeah,
so it's a camp for churches to bring along their years 3 to 6 kids. We as a church, it kind of lines up better for us ministry-wise to only take year 4 to year 6, but it just kind of works with the other programs that we have. And you go away for a weekend. It's just down at YouthWorks campsites, which if anyone's listening from further away than Sydney, there's some lovely outdoor campsites on a river.
In the Royal National Park.
In the Royal National Park, so cabins set up, and we just do typical kind of weekend churchy kid camp type things. There's talks, there's activities, there's trying to get kids to sleep late at night. There's all sorts of fun stuff. So,
My son went for the first time.
He did, yeah.
And it sounds like, I think he had a really good time.
I think so. Yeah.
And it was on Titus, is that correct? Titus chapter 2?
So it was on just one short little paragraph of 4 verses, and Titus chapter 2. And our speaker was a guy called Ben Pakula, say that clearly. And Ben is an assistant minister at a church down in southwest Sydney, but he's also a man of many talents, and one of his talents is an amazing musician. And so he has written a whole lot of kids songs, but he's also a massive metalhead. So I don't know of any other Christian children's metal music other than Ben Pakula. There might be others out there, but so he's an amazing musician. He plays excellent music that I would just choose to listen to in the car. But it's actually geared towards kids and teaching them truths about Jesus. And so he did our talks for us, and it was based, so he used that passage. He's written a song about that, so he taught us the song over the weekend, and then used each of the sentences in that little paragraph to riff on a talk, which was great.
Well, he seems to be very, very talented man. I listened to that song. That's Why We Say No? Is that what the song's called? I think that's what
that sounds about right. Yeah. You
can find him on like Spotify or anything like that. But I really enjoy that metal song that you're talking about. It was really, really cool. So
Say No to Sin is
Say No to Sin. Thank you.
Song.
If you do get a chance, check out Ben's work, because I think it's very impressive how to create music like that, but also had a very important message for kids as well. I think it's outstanding. Congratulations to him, because he's got some real talents.
Oh yeah, it's excellent. Yeah. And so the idea was the passage in Titus 2. He talks about the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to everyone. It teaches us to seek the right way. And while we wait for Christ to come is his song version of it. But essentially it's, grace saves us, but it does more than that. And he kind of cheekily at the end of the first talk says, but is salvation, is that all that grace does? And he uses the rest of that passage in Titus 2 to say, well, actually, no, it does more than that. And one of the more that it does is actually it teaches us and it helps us, and we live by grace now. It's not just salvation. And Stu's talked before about the bus ticket idea of salvation. Like, I've prayed the prayer, great, now I've got my bus ticket into heaven, I can do whatever I want now. Yep. And I know when I die, I can pull out my bus ticket and say, oh yeah, I prayed that prayer once, here I am, I'm in heaven. And this verse is a great one to go to and say, well, actually, no, it's grace not only saves us, but also the joy beyond that is it actually teaches us to say no to sin, which is where his chorus comes from, and to say yes to godliness and righteousness. And so it's the day by day, week by week, that we live by grace now. So it's, yes, saved by grace, and that's essential, but we also live by grace. And so it was a really, really powerful thing, and particularly with the kids, we're just helping them in the talks, and then we had small groups afterwards, and then throughout the weekend where we're just helping them think through what does it actually look like for God's grace to be teaching us moment by moment to live God's way. So it was great.
Highlight from Square One camp, like a conversation or something that happened?
Yeah, activity highlight for the kids is always the water slide. There's a big water slide there on camp. Yep. Yeah. So they all really, really love that. And even though it was a bit cold and wet the weekend we went, that was a huge highlight for them. Probably the highlight for me, there was a talk about midway through camp, and this is a sort of a classic Christian camp move where, somewhere in the middle of the talk you give the gospel outline and the call for some sort of commitment. And being a kids camp, he said, there might be 3 responses to the gospel. It might be that you're choosing to follow Jesus, you're continuing to follow Jesus, or you're still not sure about Jesus. And Ben said really clearly from the front that all 3 are appropriate, are good options if that's where you truly are. Talk about where you're at. And then in the small groups, me and the other leader, Josh, we split up the kids, and I took some of the kids aside, particularly some of the year 6s, which are moving out of kids ministry into youth ministry. And one of the things we went through was just, what did you guys tick on that page? There was which 3 did you want to talk about it? And all of them across just said, we ticked we want to continue to follow Jesus. This is where we are. We know we have been, and we're choosing to continue to. And that was really lovely to have them articulate. And they all articulated in different ways. They all reflected where they were on their journey, but it was really exciting. I had one boy say, I kind of did a big tick for the first one, like I want to choose to follow Jesus, but then I kind of did a half tick for the second one because I guess I already am, and so I'm continuing to follow Jesus. Yeah. And it was just really lovely. But that was really, really great, and particularly for these year 6 boys, because I'm the children's minister, and so they're leaving children's ministry, they're moving into youth ministry, and being an all-age, all-stage church, I'll have a lot more interaction with them than it might be the case in other churches that have strict homogeneous groupings. So I'll still see them around all the time. I'll have heaps of relationship with them, but there is a little bit of that loss of influence, that I'll have over these boys now. So it's lovely to, as they sort of move out of my sphere and the ministries that I help coordinate into the ministries that, Stu and Braden and Ethan help coordinate, Michael Greaves and others who are running that youth ministry. It's really nice to see where they're at that point in their life, and knowing that, that sets them up well for adolescence. And like any, kid that's grown up in a Christian household, and most of these guys have, one is from a non-Christian household, they're entering into adolescence with an understanding of who Jesus is and what it means to follow him. And they'll wrestle with that for, the next 6, 8, 10 years as they go through adolescence and young adulthood. And my prayer for them is they continue in that and continue to choose to follow Jesus. And it's really exciting. But it was just a real great joy for me to have that moment with them. And
it's special to know that you're a part of that. Whether it's a big impact or not, it's like you've just helped them know Jesus a little bit better.
That's right, And as always, in partnership with parents. And I've gotten to speak to most of those parents now and talk to them about, what their boys said.
That's cool.
Which was really lovely because again, it's not
continue that conversation.
Yeah. Their primary spiritual influence is always the household.
Yes.
And so it's great for the household to, it's not, thank you for, I'll take them for discipleship now. You can just, do your parent thing, but I'll do the discipleship thing. It's no. It's always in relationship and in partnership. And so, it's really important for me to then pass that backwards to them. Like, here's a moment that I had with your child, continue to encourage them in that.
Yeah, that must be cool. Is that like one of the best things about working in children's ministry, those kind of experiences?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm a passionate children's minister because I believe that children can and do have faith from very young. And so it's lovely to be able to see that worked out in age-appropriate ways, and for them to wrestle with that, to think about it. And obviously, developmentally, children change a lot from between 0 and 12. There's massive spectrum of what they understand faith to be, who they understand Jesus to be, and there's lots about child development which people smarter than me have talked about and written about. But I think that the most encouraging thing for me is you don't have to wait until you can articulate faith in a particular way to actually be a Christian. All the way through, the faith that a 2-year-old has and expresses can still be genuine faith. And same for the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 15-year-old, etc. And so one of the great joys for me is to see them articulate faith in age-appropriate ways, knowing that it has to develop, as we develop. If you have a 30-year-old who's stuck in a 10-year-old's expression of faith, well, then something has been stunted. They haven't developed appropriately. Right. Just like, if you had a 30-year-old that had a 10-year-old's muscular development, you go, oh, something's gone wrong there. Like, so spiritual development is different but similar. You don't want them to be only ever express faith as a 12-year-old faith. You want them to grow in depth and knowledge of understanding and relationship and love and commitment and obedience to Jesus. But the appropriate expression at the age-appropriate space is exactly what I'm looking for, and it's awesome when it happens.
And have you recovered yet?
Oh, yeah, I wasn't too tired. It was just a weekend. That's fine.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Did you have many late nights?
It wasn't too late, actually. Yeah, this year we had there were 3 boys' cabins. Previous years, we've had all of our Soul Revival boys in a hall, which is like, 12 to 15 boys in a hall, and it's nuts and it's chaos, and they love it, and it's a massive thing for them, hugely bonding for them. And it means that they're finally going to sleep about 1 a.m. after I've just had to really crack it at them and just go, no, seriously, go to sleep. This time we split them up. They still had cabin moments. They were with a few of their friends. I tried to make sure friendships were together. Yep. But they were out of it by 10:30, 11 o'clock. So
I can even see,
very late at all.
Just talking about my son's experience, I can see that he has, with the 3 boys that he was in his cabin with, he has more of a much stronger relationship with them because it's just one weekend. So that's really special. And
that's the highlight of the camping experience. Like at YouthWorks, we often talk about them as like mountaintop moments. They're kind of high points in your discipleship journey because the ability to go deep in relationship over that time, because you're spending 36 hours together. You see all the good and the bad in people during that long. And so it's really great to be able to share that with them. And one of the reasons that my YouthWorks team helps run Square One camps is there's most churches in the Sydney Diocese, and it's not just Anglicans who are there either, but most churches are not of a size where they would run their own kids camp. And so there's a lot of churches that are small to medium. You might have 5, 10, 20 kids in your kids ministry. You're not going to take 15 kids away by yourself. Like, it would be difficult to, and even less if you got 5 primary school kids. That's not really going to take away on a camp. But you get 20 churches that all have 5 to 15 kids, and you take them all away together. Well, now you've got a party, and it's really great.
There's almost 400?
There were 400 people on site. I think it was about 300 kids and 100 leaders across there, because every church comes with their own leaders. And that's the other really important part of the strategy of Square One, is that YouthWorks is not running a camp for you, so you don't have to engage in ministry. It's facilitating a space where you can minister with your kids. So we run the overheads, we run the speaker, we do all the organising of the administration and the facilitating of things that you will do. But a massively key part of it is you are coming with your kids that you are in weekly discipleship with. And so you're in the build-up towards it, you're in the follow-up afterwards, you're doing that in partnership with parents. And so, there's sort of, you go back a generation or so, and you had things like Camp Howard and these other sort of summer-type camps where the organisers would just pull leaders from any and everywhere to just try and get as many safe adults as possible to come on camp. And then kids would just come from any and everywhere. And there'd be no existing relationship between the adults on camp and the kids on camp. You just come away for a week. And that has benefit. And, I know a number of people who told me they've become Christians on Camp Howard's and those kinds of things. And it was deeply formative for them. So those things can have spiritual benefit. But we've realised that actually if we can facilitate a space where the existing relationships between leaders and or parents and the kids that they bring, if you have that pre-existing before you come to camp and it continues on after camp, that's even more powerful because it's not just a once-off connection. It's we're just facilitating a mountaintop moment for existing relationships.
Yes, I must say I'm a little bit jealous that I didn't get to go on such camps because I grew up in a non-Christian house.
Well, next year come as the leader and you'll be loving it.
Sorry?
Come as the leader next year. Then
yeah? Here
we go. We've got it on record.
Because we've got it on record of you forcing me to do it. But that's really lovely. It's cool that you get to do that at least once a year and really deepen those relationships that you are so, I know like working as children's pastor here at church is something that's really important to you. And it's cool that you get to further that even more, something like that. Yeah, that's really cool. Well, we had a conversation. This is kind of be a cultural artifact or artifacts. We were having a conversation over lunch during the staff were having lunch, and we were talking about different eras of music and what that kind of represented in culture. And I don't know where this is going to take us, but we thought we may as well talk about it.
And I took a phone call halfway through their conversation, so you'll have to fill me in on a few
things.
Well,
I kind of started it because it was something that we talked about quite a while ago on the Shock Absorber we talked about Woodstock 99. And one of the big bands that were there and when some of the really not great stuff went down was when Limp Bizkit were on stage. And I was been trying to think about, the conversation started talking about grunge music and what that represented. Jai, one of our pastors, was talking about he loved grunge music and it really felt like it really struck a chord with him in terms of what he was experiencing in his life, in his teenage life or later teenage life. And so that was all the music that came out of Seattle and represented a lot of things that teenagers were feeling at the time of not feeling heard, feeling like there was a lot of greed in the 80s and things like that. And that's why they dressed in flannelettes and ripped jeans and T-shirts and those kind of things, but had long hair. And then I was trying to think about, well, what was that moment for me? And that's why I brought up Woodstock 99, was because there was a time when I listened to a song by Limp Bizkit called Break Stuff. I borrowed the album from one of my friends. I think it was either at the end of year 8 or in early year 9. And I borrowed the album and I just heard this song called Break Stuff. And I remember I was doing my homework and I could not stop listening to it. I literally put it on repeat. And I was trying to think about, well, what did that song have in it for me that felt like was expressing how I felt? But the thing is, there was a lot of anger in that kind of music because I've started to understand, look at another band of that similar time, Slipknot. And that a lot of that is anger and you don't understand me. So I think that's where it came from. I didn't think I was angry, but I was like, I don't understand what's going on in this particular stage of my life, and this music is speaking to me for a certain way. I mean, Limp Bizkit have a song called My Generation where it's like it has swear words in it, so I'll try not to say that. But you don't, he's basically saying you don't care about me and I won't care about you until you care about me. And so I'm wondering, and this may lead to lots of other discussions what we're talking about, but I was kind of thinking, is there a particular song that kind of had a similar impact for you or a particular artist? And then we can kind of talk about why do you think that had such an impact on you? Any one that springs to mind like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked before about a lot of the music that really resonated with me, or that I was spending a lot of time listening to in the sort of mid to late 90s when I was in sort of high school, was the Christian punk, metal, hardcore scene. And a lot of that came from, there was one particular label called Tooth and Nail Records.
Oh yeah, Stu mentioned it last week, I think.
Oh right, yeah. Oh yes, he did. He talked about he mentioned 90 Pound Wuss. That was one of their bands. They're a great band. And Brandon Ebel, the guy who started that, and I think still runs it. It's been through a number of iterations, but he was a Christian guy that was a bit frustrated at the squeaky clean Christian pop rock of the 80s and early 90s.
Interesting.
And he didn't like the music. He liked kind of, punk and grunge and that kind of harder edge stuff, and wanted to start a label where bands that were Christian or Christian adjacent could express their music. And so that was where he started. So a lot of the bands, there were sort of early bands, Wish for Eden, MXPX were on there, Goaty Hook, Value Pack, these kind of bands, Starfly 59, like there's tons of them. And that was the world it was a couple of years old by the time I kind of got to it. But I sort of grew up with that world, and it started to grow in influences. A couple of those bands that were on that label got huge. So MXPX was one that sort of started as a little, I think, Seattle punk band, got onto Tooth and Nail, and they just kind of went massive, and then they became one of the leaders in pop punk, along with Blink-182 and Green Day, and those kind of The Offspring was a little bit older again, half a generation above. But you had those kind of bands, and then by the time you get to the early 2000s, you've got the sort of nu metal, post-hardcore, screamo type stuff, and bands like Under Oath and Norma Jean both came out of that Christian scene, but became leaders. Like they were headlining Warped Tour and all these kind of big things. So that was my kind of world. And when it comes to things that particularly resonated, I think one of the things I really liked about that world was, there were a number of bands like MXPX who weren't really Christian per se. Like they probably said they believed in God, but most of the band doesn't now, and they never were particularly explicit in Christian lyrics or anything like that. But there was a number of bands around across all the genres that were very explicitly Christian. So ska was massive, kind of Mighty Boss Tones kind of feel. Yep. But there were three kind of big Christian ska bands at the time. So the OC Supertones were one, Five Iron Frenzy, and then sort of a little bit behind those guys was another group called The Insiders. And those three were just explicitly Christian, positively Christian in different ways. And so that was really, really great. In the hardcore scene, there was this whole movement called Spirit-Filled Hardcore. And that was just explicitly Christian, Christ-centered rage, music. And then metal bands kind of, blended across there as well. And I think what I really liked about those was it gave me an opportunity to express youthfulness, like youth culture, but also be really stoked to be a Christian, and that Christianity was still where the action was, which is something else we might come back to. This was kind of the end of your conversation with Stu last week, was that Christianity and the church, and that was, it had energy to it. There was excitement behind it. There was, you could be confidently Christian in a really fun kind of way. And I think they were the bands that really resonated with me, that you had this, and I think built my sense of being a Christian is awesome. Like, not always pleasant, like not always fun. Like there are sad times, there's hard times, and particularly Five Iron Frenzy go a bit more into that reflective, and they were a bit critical of American Christianity more, and so they were a bit more controversial in some of their lyrics. Right. But the Supertones were just reformed evangelical guys who just had heaps of fun, and they would jump up on stage in suits and ties and just go hard. I've seen them play a couple of times, came to Australia twice, and it's just the most fun I've ever had at a live event, just dancing around with them, and just so positively and joyfully Christian in a way with also excellent music. Like you weren't compromising on style or anything. So I think those kind of things that really resonated with me. So, which meant that when I heard things like Limp Bizkit and Slipknot and other bands, firstly, I didn't really have the capacity to pick up any of those bands because there was so much happening in the Christian scene. Mm-hmm. I just didn't have enough money to spread around. And this was, when you had to actually buy a CD to listen to it, you didn't have...
It's like $25 or something.
Yeah, it was like if you wanted to get into an album, it's $25. Yeah, that's right. Or your mate's $25 because he's bought it and you've shared it around. And so there was a limited capacity that we had to actually engage in different genres. So you kind of had to pick your lane and stick with it. Otherwise, you couldn't keep up with that genre or those groups of bands and branch out because you just didn't have the finances to keep up with too many artists. And this subgroup wasn't on the radio, obviously. So you're not going to turn to Triple M or Triple J and hear Christian punk bands. So that was another limiting factor, was for me and my mates who were really heavily into that scene, it was about, sample discs and, passing around things at school, and, that was kind of the world that we were in, which also feels a little bit subversive, and, there's something special about being into a genre that not many people know about.
Like a bit underground.
Yeah, it felt really underground because these were bands that no one else had really heard of. They're not on the radio, not even on the underground stations like Triple J and FBI and those kinds of things. And they almost never come to Australia. So it's not like you can go to the gigs and watch them. So from the distance that we are, it was very underground. It felt very special that we were into this secret club kind of thing, which, for teenagers is really powerful to have those little subcultures that you feel like you're strongly part of as well.
Well, speaking about how I developed my music taste, I later on got into more classic rock at the end of high school. And the trigger for that was there's a band called The Darkness, which is in my opinion, one of the last great proper rock bands.
Right.
But then I learned about their influences, which were AC/DC and Led Zeppelin. And with Led Zeppelin, one of the things that they became so popular was they were completely underground because they barely released a single on the radio.
Right, yeah.
It was, you buy our album, like our full album, obviously it was on vinyl at the time, but people were basically, have you got the Led Zeppelin album yet? Because you couldn't hear it on the radio, but you could find have you got the full album? And they were like, we're so confident in our music and our artistic endeavors that you can only get it on the album. That's the only way to consume it, which is funny. I think the reason that we were talking about it too as a staff team was I read an article recently. It was someone on someone's Substack. His name is Adam Mastroianini. Hopefully I haven't butchered that too bad. I apologise, Adam. And he wrote an article called "Pop Culture Has Become an Oligopoly."
Right.
And first of all, we had to check what an oligopoly was. It's an industry that is dominated by a few big players.
Yeah. So it's not a monopoly where you've just got one big player.
Yeah.
So you've got a few, but they're still squeezing out.
I would say maybe the tech industry is to a degree an oligopoly because you've just got Apple, Amazon, those kind of things, but maybe not. But I was trying to think of what's an absolute monopoly. Can you think of anything? I was wondering Qantas is kind of almost there in Australia now.
Yeah, maybe.
But Virgin Australia still exists in its lesser form. Yeah. I was trying to think what else is a monopoly.
Yeah, I don't know if we have absolute monopolies. I mean, you've got like the groceries for
just
Australia.
like
It's Woolies and Coles, and then you've got Aldi, which is kind of chasing from behind.
And IGA, but they're independent.
Yeah.
So maybe that is an oligopoly then.
Yeah, but I mean, IGA, I don't know if that would count.
They're not going to compete.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, but the reason we were talking about it was that it was a nice, friendly debate about whether this was true or not, because part of it is true that you only have the biggest artists are individuals. So, for example, Ed Sheeran, or who does all of his music himself and uses a guitar and loops and everything when he plays. Then you've got Taylor Swift, for example, Beyonce. All the biggest players in music are Kanye West to a certain degree, maybe not so much anymore. Even Kendrick Lamar, like the whole thing is just individuals. It's all individuals now. It's not big rock bands.
Yeah, interesting.
So the idea also of, 4 or 5 people getting together and just learning how to play in a garage is not really a thing anymore. And now I think you even mentioned that Dave Grohl says there's a lot to do with that. Dave Grohl, the drummer of Nirvana and the lead singer of the Foo Fighters. Yeah,
I read his memoir stories. I can't remember what it's called. The Storyteller, I think. Read his book recently, and that was one of his laments is with the overconsumption of digital media and the ability to not ever be bored, that where young people are not grabbing a musical instrument and just mucking around and trying to figure out how to play. And he's lamenting, he says, I wonder how much great music we're missing out on because young people are not learning, not getting their friends. When you can be sedated by your screen in your hand 24/7, you're never going to get to a point where you're bored enough to ring up your friend and say, hey, do you want to, you kind of hit drum things, I kind of strum guitar things, let's just put it together in my parents' garage. It just doesn't happen anymore because we're so sedated by our screens that it's I can't remember his name now, but there was a book written in the 80s called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Is it Neil Postman, I think? So, and this is what he kind of highlights, and he's just talking about the TV world.
Yes.
And it's, I mean, completely unimaginable to him. And he passed away before the internet world really kicked off. But yeah, if TVs were amusing ourselves to death, then we're just completely sedated by our screens. And the lack of boredom leads to lack of creativity. And so this is part of Dave Grohl's lament and this idea that, well, where are all these new bands coming from? Like, where are they? Yeah. But it's also, on the other hand, you've got an overabundance of places you can, like artists you can listen to, and there's a flattening out as well of pop culture.
Thanks to the internet, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you go to Spotify and it's just as easy to find some band from down the road that listen to, that released a track as it is to find Taylor Swift. And there'll be some algorithms at play that help push some artists and not others. But the democracy of Spotify, I mean, it's great for the band down the road that's released a single because everyone can find it. Whereas before you had a limitation of access. You weren't able to find these bands. And that was part of the underground scene that me and my friends who were really into Tooth and Nail had, was it was actually really hard to get those albums.
Right.
You had to, they most of the time would never end up in Sanity or Virgin Music or Grace Brothers or all the places we were buying CDs.
Yeah, I just remember that.
In the late 90s.
CDs, wasn't it?
Yeah. You go through and you flick through the racks of all the CDs.
Yeah.
But all the bands we were into would never appear there. Maybe they might have one MXPX album because they were just on the cusp of being popular. But they'd never stock a Goaty Hook or a Five Iron Frenzy or a Showbread. And so you had to go to the Christian bookstore was massive, and so you go there, and so there was one near us, Word at Sutherland, Coorong over in West Ryde, and so I remember me and my mates, we would go for day trips in the school holidays, and we'd catch the train out to West Ryde with the 3 different changes of platforms and whatever to get out there to go to Coorong for the day because that was the place where you could find the music that we were into, but it was really hard to access, which added to the specialness of it, I think. Whereas now it's super easy to find all these bands. And I've got all these bands that I knew of a song from a sampler disc that I can now go back onto Spotify and play their entire album and go, oh yeah, this was really good. I wish I had this 20 years ago. But again, limited access. We just didn't have it.
Well, and again, that's part of the discussion was is it actually an oligopoly, or I use the word homogeneity? Is it actually a case, or is it just our perception is that? Because very helpfully, Ethan was saying, well, the methods of discovery have changed so much because of the internet. It might be a TikTok song, and you hear it multiple times. You remember when you used to listen, well, I used to listen to the radio more. I don't listen to the radio anymore. I just listen to podcasts, really, is that you would hear the same song. This is how it came out. We talked about the bands that came after the grunge music, like Creed and Nickelback and Live. Those kind of bands were almost leftovers from that grunge era, or influenced by that grunge era, but were played repeatedly on the radio. Like you just remember hearing those songs over and over again.
Yeah, you listen to Triple M in the late 90s and that's just that all the time.
Yeah, that's what it was like. And then, but now the method of that happening is shorter versions, but like this repetitive version that's used in a ton of meme reels and TikToks. And that's how we kind of discover things like that. But then I was also related it to movies as well, how there seems to be little creativity coming out of movie studios these days, unless it's, I know there's the Napoleon movie coming out soon, which is a Ridley Scott film. So he's built his cachet.
Yeah, he's got the kudos to build something
and to
massive.
And to garner a large budget as well.
Yeah.
And in this article that I was talking about, the writer has tracked movies in the top 20 by revenue that are prequels, sequels, spin-offs, remakes, reboots, or cinematic universe expansions.
Yeah.
And the increase from, let's say, the mid-1990s up until 2020 is something like, it used to be 25% of the movies, and now it's up above 75%, according to his data. So it feels like there's maybe two competing things there. That is, the method of discovery is far, far easier, but the top level is that oligopoly, just a few artists that really take the top level, because it's also, artists don't make anywhere near as much money from album sales because of streaming now.
Yeah.
So now they have to tour more, or they have to have larger tours, but the artists at the top level are doing even bigger and bigger shows. So I think the perception is that, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the clamour around Taylor Swift's latest tour is gigantic. Yeah, the Eras tour. Thank you for pointing that out. But I even saw Metallica, who are a reasonably aging band now, are doing a complete stadium tour of the entire world. And that's not new, but even their stage presence is that they were in a football stadium in Germany, and the stage would take up, the stage that they've done is almost in the round, but there's people in the middle allowed, and they actually go around the outside almost as a circle.
Yeah, okay.
But then there's like these, it's almost like an oval, there's 4 points because there's 4 members in the band, that they basically aren't in connection with each other as much as you would be on a stage just facing the audience, which is really interesting.
Yep.
So there's videos, like people have taken on their phones, of James Hetfield just basically in his own, like getting ready for the show to start, but he's there on his own. He's not with his bandmates. He's just out on his own. And so I think it's an interesting picture of, almost what our culture's like, of this exceptionally individualistic culture that Metallica set, but also to a gigantic audience.
Yeah, it's interesting.
As well. The last thing I've seen of that is just how music like grunge, or even I think earlier about the rock and roll, and how that was influenced very heavily from the rock and roll that came out of the US in the 50s. That was influenced by the blues musicians in the 30s and 40s, and then transferred over to the UK, and then they called the British Invasion when they went back to the UK. And as I said, like mentioned Led Zeppelin before, they were a big part of that too. But that scene, even in the 60s,
Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden,
that's right. They all came out of that scene that was created around blues music in the early 60s, in London. And that's the interesting, the how music that influences the world is actually comes out of particular areas where a scene was created. Like Seattle, for example, was a huge scene for grunge. San Francisco and LA was a huge scene for that early metal era where Metallica came out.
Yep. You got Huntington Beach area, which is massive for the pop punk. So your Offsprings and those kind of things really come out of that Huntington, Venice Beach kind of surf culture, but also skate culture. That was massive for that era. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, surf and skate, because that was such a big,
massive part of that pop punk late 90s.
Yeah, so and like I said, there's the scene in London. I'm trying to think if there's any others. I can't think off the top of my head, but I suppose what my link is, and my question is, can you create a Christian scene where there's a lot of Christians getting stoked about something like you were even with the Christian pop punk music? Can we do that to influence the world? That's my question. That's the place you want to be in order to influence the world in a gospel way.
It's like, I think the thing that happens with these little musical subcultures is you have people who genuinely love the thing that they're interested in and will sacrifice for it.
Yep.
And that's when that culture catches on, and you have people that are really excited, and they have longevity. And so, you've got it, you can see the seed of these ideas starting, often in reaction against the previous musical style. So grunge is reacting against big hair metal, glam rock, kind of massive stage production, massive costumes, massive like makeup, hair, all these kinds of large solos, all these kind of thing. And grunge comes along and it's simple, it's repetitive, it dowers like a style in terms of rather stripped back style. So it kind of it's in reaction to, but and I think pop punk kind of is a reaction a little bit towards grunge. Like it picks up a lot of that grunge, but it also looks at that and goes, "Why are you so sad?" Gen Xers, let's just be silly and have fun. And I mean, very hedonistic, but the whole skate surf culture is very much about like just enjoying life, and so hedonistic pleasures. But let's have fun with this. Let's be silly and so you have Blink-182 where they're writing dumb songs.
A film clip just running naked.
Yeah, running naked through the streets of LA, and it's silly. Like it's just dumb. And that was Punked and Jackass and those kind of TV shows came out of this. Like it was just frivolous. But what I think what happens is you've got these movements that start small, they start to grow, and it's that curve of you've got the experimenters, you've got the early adopters, you've got the early majority, late majority. You've got this little curve thing that's just quite common in trends, and that's kind of happening in the music scenes. So you've got grunge starting in Seattle, you've got the British invasion coming out of London, these kind of scenes. But the ones that are authentic and grow energy are the ones that you've still got people sacrificing for. Like it's hard going for a long time, and you get a few breakout artists that might get some radio play, and then you kind of get this almost institutionalized version of that. And so, Blink-182 come along and they're groundbreaking in terms of style. And then every record company wants a Blink-182. And so if they can't get Blink-182, they'll find someone else. They'll look for the next, who else is there? All right, we've got to find the next pop punk band. And everyone needs a pop punk band. And every label has a pop punk band, and everyone's touring pop punk bands.
Sum 41,
you got all these kind of crew coming through. And, so you have the same kind of, even with the manufactured bands like, the Spice Girls and the, NSYNC and all these, the boy bands and the girl bands, Backstreet Boys. And, you get one group that goes massive and everyone's like, we've got to create our own little manufactured version of people who can dance and, lip sync along to the songs that we've produced for them and all that kind of stuff. So, and I think the connection with the excitement about Christianity, you've got these other moments where Christianity has started small and it requires sacrifice and hardship, and the committed people make it happen. And then you start to build and build and build. And when you get to the early majority and then to the late majority of take-up of an idea is potentially when it starts to commercialise, when it starts to become popular, and it takes less sacrifice to be a part of that community, and therefore it cheapens the experience, and it's also a lot easier to hang loose to. And if that continues for a couple of generations, then you get people who it's really not that important to them. It may be part of their cultural identity, but they're not particularly wedded to it as an idea. And I think part of the challenge is, how do you continue to make the eternal gospel constantly, I don't know what it is. It's requiring sacrifice. Like bringing back to that idea that it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. And in the hardship is its value, which again comes back to what we said earlier about the constantly being pacified by our devices. And this was Neil Postman's idea about, amusing ourselves to death. Like when the media we consume and the life we consume doesn't require much of us, we're taking away the hardship, and the hardship is what actually brings us value. Yeah. And so this is what, and I think we've noticed this, and there are sectors of our society who are noticing this. And this is where I think you get people like Jordan Peterson, Ryan Holiday, these kind of guys that are advocating virtues and virtue formation, which is, and they're acknowledging that this will be difficult. Like they're not promising an easy life. They're promising something that's difficult and hard and worth it. And they're also particularly resonating with people who have had life really easy. They have been pacified. They've never had to be bored in their life. They're living in the suburbs in one of the richest, most prosperous times in the world, in the safest locations in the world. And people are feeling dead inside because of it. And you're like, what's going on?
Yeah, there's no value from doing something difficult.
That's right. Yeah. So if you've grown up in a low middle class or upward family in a suburb in a Western city, you've probably had very little struggle. Now, obviously, there's massive class distinction there. There's going to be other distinctions, race distinctions, etc. But generally speaking, there are a lot of people who have never quite had that hardship and never had to work through hard things to get to the other side, to get to creativity, to get to virtue, to get to whatever it is. And I think there's a growing number of people, and interestingly, I don't know why all the reasons are, but there's particularly young adult males who are resonating with this idea and going, I want someone to push me. I want someone to challenge me.
And want the discipline.
Yeah, that's right. And, 15 years ago, we had this with Mark Driscoll. This was the Mark Driscoll phenomenon. Yeah. Was, he came up and told young adult men to...
Put your pants on.
Put your pants on, tuck your sheets in, make your bed, and move out of your mum's basement. Grow up and get a life. Now, he had a particular Christian version of that. Jordan Peterson's got a quite relatively secularized version of that. Ryan Holiday's got the Stoic philosophy version of that. But it's the same message, which is basically, take responsibility, and responsibility is difficult. Responsibility is hard. Yeah. And I think that's why it kind of resonates. Now, how do we do that without just mimicking culture, but actually do it genuinely from the gospel? And I think there's a lot about what it means to live a Christian life, which, because it is true, will resonate if we can communicate the truth of that gospel in a way that will resonate with that culture. And so that people can see the relevance for that heartache that they have of amusing themselves to death. They realise that they're lackadaisical. They realise that they're not achieving, and so you can say, let's reframe those with a gospel-centered mind and say, well, actually what Jesus calls us to is a lifelong commitment to take up your cross and follow him. And that in itself, like when you start to tease that out, you realize that has some of these elements that people are desperately striving for. And I think it's sad that people are finding that in Jordan Peterson and not in the church. Because it should be the church that should be...
Because that almost means they can't find it in the church.
That's right, yeah. And maybe it's because they're disconnected from the church. And there's all these anecdotal stories about people who are finding the church because of Jordan Peterson, because he's kind of weirdly mystic, religious in some way. And that's, great. That's awesome. But, to challenge people with the person of Jesus Christ, the historical, unique person of Jesus Christ, and what it means to be a disciple of him, has so much to say to where the world is right now. We need to work out as a church how to communicate that in a way that people will hear and will resonate to. And I'm not just talking about, packaging Jesus so that he's attractive. It's like, no, the truth of Jesus resonates deeply with the human spirit because it's true and it's good and it's beautiful. But because, culture changes, and helping that good, true and beautiful message in the 1970s is different to the 2020s. And so it's, how do you keep that message, the true message, the same, but help tease out the particular resonances that it has with today's culture. And I have no idea how we got to hear from Beyonce.
That's all right. I mean, we're talking about music scenes and how do we make that attract? Like, how can that be something that Christians can do as well? Create a Christian scene, invite others into it, but also be impacting the world as well. But I mean, it's interesting that you, in a lot of things that you said there, I'm wondering if that I use that kind of thing of listening to Limp Bizkit, that maybe that's what I was looking for, was like, everything seems too easy.
Yes, I think that's what they tap into. They tap into a dissatisfaction, the youth culture dissatisfaction and anger at the world. And, again, that half generation earlier, you go back 5 years from Limp Bizkit and you've got Blink-182 and The Offspring raging against suburban identities because they're growing up in America's suburbia and they hate it. Green Day as well, and they're realising that this promised utopia of, beautiful house, picket fence, 2.5 kids in backyard in suburbia, it's supposed to be beautiful, and yet their parents are still depressed, divorced, suicidal, they're high on drugs, their mates are committing suicide. You've got all this gun violence that's become really apparent from Columbine particularly onwards through the late 90s. And it's like, hold on a sec, we live in a really part of the world with really high standards of living.
Which you're told is the end.
We're told, this was our baby boomer parents' hopes for us.
Yes.
That we would live in this environment, and this environment is killing us. What's gone wrong? And so, you start to get that with a little bit of the punk scene, and I think it comes to a head, particularly in that
with the
new
anger
metal kind of stuff, the Slipknot.
The anger of you're telling me this is what it should have been like, and now I'm finding out that it's not. So what have you been doing? Why did you tell me this was? That's interesting.
And in parallel, you also get the emo scene, which is, I think there's lots of crossovers, but there's some uniquenesses. And one of the key things in the emo scene is, well, life sucks, it's really hard, but there's nothing I can do about that. And because of that, I'm just going to turn inward. And so I'm just going to sit here in my corner and be sad. So I'll dress in black, I'll have black makeup, I'll, be depressed, and I'll mourn, and walk around like the world's ending and it's really terrible.
But you also pay me attention.
Pay attention to me
and
help
find
me to do
out
that.
There's something wrong with me. There's something that it's not right.
And I think a lot of that emo scene is just becomes navel gazing, But again, they don't know what to do. And so, Slipknot and what was the other one you mentioned?
Limp Bizkit.
Limp Bizkit. Korn. Basically to tell you out, just destroy the world because the world sucks. And emo tells you to just look inside and be sad because the world sucks. Before that, I think the punk movement has a little bit more of, I think there's something a little bit more optimistic about punk. It's like, let's break things, but because there's probably something on the other side that's better. So they're raging against the system with something a little bit more positive, I think. But by the time you get to Limp Bizkit and My Chemical Romance, it's kind of like there's nothing positive on the other side. It's all over. Just be sad or just destroy things. And you get Woodstock 99 where you just burn the place to the ground. Because what else is there to do? You just need something cathartic. I need to feel something.
I need to feel hardship.
Yeah.
Most what you're talking about before.
Yeah.
Because I know even on one of the Woodstock 99 docos that I watched, they were saying that they related it to Woodstock 94, which is when they had a lot of the grunge. I know grunge was a little bit earlier than that, but it had a lot of the grunge bands in it. And even they were saying that even people like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and the bands of that time there was still more of a hope of like there's better things on the other side, kind of what you were saying, but also more of a social perspective around it. I mean, my favourite band at that time is Rage Against the Machine.
Right.
Because they were the first, I reckon they're probably the first band that really spoke to me.
Okay.
But then they were talking about so many different political things that I had no idea about.
Yeah.
That I was taken in by it, because I think maybe I was also looking for something that would be intellectually stimulating. And I'm like, what's all these? They're talking about Noam Chomsky and the Democratic Party and AM radio hosts, and what are these guys talking about? Like they're actually engaged in issues that matter, or maybe will matter when I'm a bit older, I suppose.
Yeah.
So there's that element of that, but then as you're saying, it sounds like by the time you get to Woodstock 99, it's all over, but it's in the ground, which is it's not. I mean, life still goes on, but it's not really that pleasant when you look back on it. And I wonder if that time, and that's why I'm only reflecting on it now, like it's 20 odd years ago, and now I'm thinking, well, these are all the issues that I was I mean, it's not that prescriptive or explicit, but it's like, that's all the things that I was feeling at the time but didn't know how to, and that's the point of the music. Going back to the idea of what could a Christian scene do, or what could a Christian scene impact the world? We've been talking in the last couple of weeks about costly discipleship. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about that a lot. Yep. But also last week we talked about how copying culture probably isn't enough. And you were talking about sacrifice, and I thought it was really cool. Just in my mind, you're saying that adoption curve, it requires less sacrifice to adopt it later on. So then I'm thinking, less sacrifice. It doesn't require as much sacrifice to copy culture, even as Christians. But to create the Christian cultural goods that Stu has introduced that term to us via the work of Andy Crouch, he's saying that it is costly, and it does cost more. Like it requires more sacrifice to be able to do that. What do you think about that? Because I mean, it touches on a lot of things that we've been talking about, looking for things that are harder, looking for hardship to actually create things of value. That makes me think of the cultural goods. But also, sacrificing yourself actually brings us together for a reason, that, Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate cost. And that's where I believe that Bonhoeffer gets a lot of his work from, obviously, is like, what are we going to give up in order to further the gospel for that case? So I'm trying to draw the thread between that kind of music scene idea, it's a Christian scene idea, and us being costly disciples to one another, and to be able to impact the world in that way. Do you think Is that something that resonates with you?
Yeah, I think the thing about copying culture, I mean, what's the motivation? Why are you trying to copy culture? And it might be you're trying to be relevant in helpful ways. You're trying to, like I said before, we might be trying to resonate with where culture is at, and so therefore
contextualizing.
So contextualizing would be a helpful way of doing that. But sometimes it's because we want cultural validation, and so I'll copy the ways of the world in order to get validation from the world.
Like it's okay to be a Christian.
Yeah, or maybe if
I'm a Christian, I can still fit in.
Yeah, like if Taylor Swift is the most popular artist, if I can just be the next Christian Taylor Swift, then I can have really influence as well. And that's why often Christians are about 10 years behind culture. When you keep trying to chase culture, you end up doing the forms that you see, not seeing the hard work that Taylor Swift has put in for the last however many years she's been doing, 20 years or something.
Must be 20 years or something like that.
She's been an artist for. And you're just trying to copy this particular moment, which means actually you're 20 years behind her game, and you'll probably be about 10 years late producing anything of the near quality that she's got now. And she'll have moved on. I mean, this is the whole eras to her, right? Like she's reinvented herself constantly every 5 years or whatever. And so there's different versions of Taylor that different people who have got onto the journey at different points resonate with.
Some would argue just a different boyfriend, but yeah.
Well, that's a cynical take.
Yeah. I'm a cynical man.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a really good friend who really liked her early country albums. And by the time she starts getting massive radio play, was kind of like, I was kind of losing interest because it's not my style.
Interesting.
And then there's plenty of the younger generation, like my daughter's generation, who are, getting into it because she's popular now, and then discovering this old stuff and going, oh, that's a little bit quaint, isn't it? Stuff. Whereas my friend, who's almost my age, was the opposite. Been listening to Taylor well before she was popular, and sort of lost interest more as she's become more and more pop or mainstream or changed her styles in different ways. But that's the whole thing about the eras tour, is wherever you are, you want to come because she's going to play stuff from the era that you like and enjoy herself in. I've well and truly lost track of what the question was, but just riffing off, how do we create culture? The hardship. I think hardship is a key part. Like maybe not hardship. Maybe that's a negative way of saying it. God created us to work. So even in Genesis 1 and 2, before you get the fall, you still get Adam having to toil the ground. You still get him having to work in the garden and be creative and to procreate in terms of family, but also procreate in terms of cultural goods and farming and all these kinds of things. And presumably, if Adam and Eve hadn't been the first ones to fall, you could have had generations after generations who had to work and put in effort in order to achieve a particular good, whether it's growing, carrots, or whether it's producing music, or staging drama shows for the community, whatever it is. And so, it's work, and that's why I kind of want to avoid the word hardship, because it's not a negative necessarily to put in effort to achieve a greater good. It's part of how God's designed us to be. And so I think, again, coming back to that, part of copying culture is I can copy what someone else has done. I don't have to put in a lot of that effort, that initial effort myself. Whereas creating something that's genuinely Christian and positive might create more effort. It's also going to be harder because, particularly in a post-Christian world, we're not going to get resonances with the broader community. People aren't going to go, going to church, hearing Christian things, listening to Christian music, reading Christian books is not a normative thing for our culture. And so it might be that we don't make a lot of money by creating cultural goods, Christian cultural goods. We might not make a living out of creating cultural goods. There's even a movement at the moment where people are talking about it might be unviable for ministers to expect to be paid full-time for their churches, and so to be bivocational I think there's one book coming out recently. I haven't read it, but I think the future is bivocational, something like that. And the whole argument is this idea that even pastors are not going to necessarily be able to afford from their congregations to pay their rent, buy food for them or their families. And so it might be that you pastor the church part-time and you stock shelves at Kmart, the other half, or you keep up your freelance art, or you keep, whatever it is. You've got other things that you're doing in the wider world because there's just not enough cultural cachet and therefore people in your building to pay you to only pastor and not do anything else. So that's going to be some of the sacrifices, that it might not be able to create a living off these things. But perhaps it might be that, like some of these other grassroots movements, that you start to, because of the hardship and because of the sacrifice and because of those who buy into it early, the early adopters, who also have to sacrifice in order to be in that community, to then that creates an energy around it, which people get excited by. People, and that then grows. So is it possible? Yeah, I think it is. I think the whole history of grassroots movements is that it is possible to grow from very small into something big. But that's not promised to us that it will happen. And the marker of success is not the size to which our cultural good grows. It's the marker of success is faithfulness. And so if that's the case, then it really doesn't matter if my cultural good that I've created is, large by, number metric, publication metric, Spotify playlist metric, podcast metric, the number of listeners per episode, or, those
YouTube subscribers.
Click
subscribe.
If they're not the metrics, but it's faithfulness, then, that's what, at the end of time, when Jesus comes back, he's going to say, good and faithful servant. That's what he's looking for. And it may be because of, other factors that actually grows into a substantial movement and the cultural good becomes something that's more pervasive, perhaps, or maybe not. But that's not what's promised to us. What's promised to us is eternal life in new creation with Jesus because of our faithfulness. And I think that is also why, and I haven't read Andrew Crouch, but just listening to Stu talk about him, I think that's why it's the creation of positive Christian cultural goods that aren't just copying or conflict or criticising culture, but is actually just trying to build something positive. I think that's why that is good to pursue and why it's a much better strategy than any of the others. Because you're actually being faithful to a good and positive generative work of God rather than just criticising. It's not hard to criticise. There's plenty of YouTubers who just sit there and criticise others and you just go, that's fine, man, but tell me something positive.
Reaction videos,
It's
very reactive, not proactive.
That's right, watch so-and-so react to this video or this cultural moment or...
You said what?
Yeah. They're easy to make and they're marketable but all that's doing is criticising culture. It's not creating a positive cultural good. And so I think that's what we should be striving for.
Yeah. I was just thinking while you were saying that about how Stu has reiterated it a couple of times on the podcast about how when Soul Revival was just starting, one of the things that they realised was they weren't giving their best night to God. And it was when they felt that a big driver behind the growth of Soul Revival was giving up their best night, which is, Saturday night was considered, that's when the night everyone went out. That's when they would meet, hang out as friends and be around the Word of God. And that's what I'm thinking about now, because for me, and this is only from my point of view, is that obviously I've only ever been part of Soul Revival ministry, really. Whether it was youth ministry or at Soul Revival Church. And Saturday night, which is when I go to church, is very much the centerpiece of my week. That's a lot of the time I'm looking forward to that. I want to go to church. I want to be there. And I think my children are the same. They're like, church is what we do every Saturday night, and we do that. And I think that might be different for a lot of people. And I think a lot of that speaks to, that costly decision, or that doing those things that are, require work or service, or those things that we're talking about. So I know that someone asked you relatively recently about their thinking about starting a Saturday night. What's your thinking around that? And I mean, you go to church on Sunday most of the time. So it's not so much the day that you do it, it's what is it representing? Because I see it as a kind of almost like a home base that I return to every single week, where I go to learn more about the Word of God, be in fellowship with the same people that are Christians, that are listening to the Word of God, and being on discipleship together.
Yeah. And
then so that we can go out for the rest of the week and be the same. Not. I mean, I think sometimes we talk about copying culture. I feel like sometimes Christians are copying culture and going to church on Sunday for an hour a week, rather than allowing the time at church to be a really formative and helpful time, so that they can go out and bring glory to God for the rest of the week, and then return back to that kind of home base idea. I'm just interested what you thought about that, and also what were your kind of recommendations for someone asking about starting on a service on Saturday night?
Yeah, so a mate of mine just rang me up and said, this is what we're thinking about. We're just tossing ideas around. It's not a set thing, but I know you guys do it. I know it's really important to you. And so why is that? Just talk me through the strategy. And so we did. We just talked through the strategy, and that counterculturally choosing the most important social night of the week and saying, I'm going to give that to God and to his people, is a hardship. And like we've been talking about, that hardship actually creates a passion and an excitement that generates interest and starts to build. So you get a strong commitment from the people who choose to opt into that option.
Yep.
And it also generates interest from the outside, because people go, you always do that church thing on Saturday night and you never come out to the pub with us. Why is that? Oh, because where else would I be? Of course I'd be at church. Yeah. I like you and I enjoy your friendship, and if we can go out any other night of the week, or if we want to go out for lunch on Sunday, or even Sunday night, let's go out to the pub. But Saturday night, this is the most exciting thing. I can't think of anything better to do with my Saturday night than to be at church with God and his people.
Well, even when I go on holidays and I miss church because I'm on holidays, I miss church.
Yeah,
if I miss it for 1 or 2 weeks, I'm like, I need to get back to church.
Yeah, yep. And again, so it doesn't have to be a Saturday night. But interestingly for us, the reason we're on Sunday morning was actually a hardship.
Yeah.
And because, Saturday night was the only service we had for a long time. So all of our family, like all of the energy and gravity, was on Saturday night. And so of course we wanted to be on Saturday. And Saturday night was the highlight of our week. And there's a nice benefit of, in terms of we've spent 6 hours in community with God's people around his word, nourishing on actual food, spiritual food, fellowship with each other on Saturday night, and you get all of Sunday free. That's pretty cool. Like that's, for someone who's been in ministry for since they were a teenager, not doing anything on Sunday was really weird, but really refreshing.
Okay,
just go, oh, wow. Like to have Sunday free was huge for us. But two things kind of coincide at the same time. One was our kids were getting at an age where they were struggling to stay up late. Yeah. So we were feeling like we needed to head home soon after the service. Yep. Smash down a little bit of dinner, but then go. And we were feeling a pain there, because we're like, we want to hang out late. And if we were child free, we could hang out late and did. Before we had kids, we were one of the last ones to turn the lights off on, at Guy Mere, Soul Revival. And, and so, but as our kids kind of got to an age where actually, no, their sleep was a practical need that needed to be, looked after. So that was something that we were wrestling with, was just like, our value as soul revivalists was to, spend a long time in community with each other, and we were finding that increasingly difficult to do. And then at the same time, we as a church team were talking about planning a Sunday morning gathering, And so it was actually, it was a hardship. It was in that kind of pain point of actually going, well, what if we are part of that launch team? What if we help plant the Sunday morning service? And that meant we were removing ourselves from the key relationships that we had, the key family that we had, the key drivers and excitement of that. And just with a small handful of those, so we had people like the Foxes and the Redmonds, and I think the Sabs were there at the time, the early days. I'm sure there were others. So there was probably about a dozen, 20 maybe tops of us who, butted out of Saturday night to plant Sunday morning in the hope that we could reproduce some of those soul revival values on a Sunday morning. So how are we going to do food? How are we going to spend a long time together? How are we going to make sure the community as well as formal gathering time are really important to us and key to us? So yeah, we were experimenting with that. What does that look like? And so that's now where we've been for, 6 years, however long Sunday morning gathering has been around for, probably longer. I always lose track of time. And now, and now we have those relationships. We have, a whole new set of relationships of people who have come and joined the church on Sunday mornings who were not part of that Saturday church expression, who we do have deep fellowship, deep friendship, love spending time together. Our best Sundays are the Sundays we don't have to rush off to something else, but are actually able to stay longer. And around 12:30, 1 o'clock, we're going, I probably should either go home or at least grab lunch for all of us. Like they're really joyful moments now because we are expressing those soul revival values on a different time. But again, it's a commitment and it's hard, and it does take effort, and it does take saying no to things, and to make sure that happens. So it's interesting that we're still trying to express those soul revival values, even though we kind of look like it's a normal church service.
It's a regular time.
It's a regular time, churches, isn't it? Yeah, but we're trying to still express the uniquenesses of the strategy, which is really interesting. But I think that the key point I think you're driving towards is this idea that, yes, the hardship creates value, and the value creates excitement. And the excitement is what starts to build that movement, that grassroots movement, because people are intrigued by that. People are interested and go, why are you committing so much time on such an inconvenient space for this? Well, it's because it's totally worth it. And it's genuinely exciting to do this together.
And on that idea of cultural goods, it's almost like to spend that long at church is it's a countercultural good almost. I mean, that's just a matter of semantics.
Well, it's counterculture to the world,
yeah,
and even to a lot of church cultures. But we've created it. We've created the cultural good. And those there's many people who have bought into it hook, line and sinker, who are just like, I'm all in. And there's lots of other people who are kind of on the periphery going, I really like this. I'm not sure why. I don't know if I can articulate it, but I really like the vibe here. There's something really special about this. And so that's really attractive, both for those who are not Christians, who are finding that intriguing, and also for Christians who have had experience at other churches who come and go, there's something different about this. Your gospel's not different, your preaching's not different, the songs are pretty much the same as churches I've been in, your prayers are pretty much the same, your Bible studies are pretty much the same, but there's something about this. And what is it? Well, it's this cultural good that we're trying to create around community and the expression of community. And I think Week Away would be another thing. Week Away is a cultural good. And most people I talk to, I said this before, like go, a week away? A week? I was like, don't you mean a weekend? No, I don't mean a weekend. I mean a week. Well, it's 5 days, 5.5 days that we spend with each other intentionally creating culture. And that is really hard. And there's that sacrifice. It requires sacrifice to say, I'm going to take a week of my annual leave to go on a church week away. That I would take, a significant amount of money. It's the most money that my family spends on any trip at any point in the year is to go on a week away. We don't go anywhere else. We don't have other holidays. That is our holiday because that's what we can afford. But of course we choose that because we love it.
Yeah.
And if the choice was between that and a week in Fiji, then we'd choose week away every time. Like, absolutely. Because there's that cultural good, there's a passion and excitement and joy around that, that is different to, but in other words, incomparable to, just a family holiday somewhere.
And I think there's the link between, how we started this episode almost, or talking about the cultural artifacts at the very least, was me resonating with what Limp Bizkit was saying, but still not knowing, is a cool way that those Christian cultural goods would work, would help people, whether Christian or non-Christian, people resonate with that and go, why do I want to be part of this more? Why do I want to spend more time in this current situation that I'm in, rather than, if church is seen as just copying culture, it's like, well, it's exactly the same, but like Jesus just sprinkled on top.
Yeah.
It's like, no, Jesus is transformative. So let's transform our lives. So the action is in the church. It's the centerpiece of our week, which is, again, very countercultural. When it's appealing, maybe not appealing is the right word, but it's intriguing to people. Why would you bother doing this? Why would you bother going a week away? So you've had other Christians ask you that, for example.
I think most people, when I talk to them, they kind of go, "Oh, wow, that sounds amazing, but it would never happen in my context."
That's what I'm saying.
It's the thought that, that's. I don't think anyone has really said, "Why would you do that?" Not from a Christian point of view, but just that would never happen here. Like, there's no. Most churches struggle to get their crew to a day away, which is not really a day away, it's a day in, where let's just do church all day. And that's kind of a novel thing that they push towards, because they've given up on the idea of a weekend, but they're still trying to have some sort of, again, that kind of mountaintop experience, because it's just like with the square one kind of stuff for kids. Having church house parties, which is, a weekend away, that's a thing that goes back generations. Well into my parents' and grandparents' time, was churches going on house parties, having a weekend away. And there's a lot of feeling by a lot of churches that that era is gone. Like, you can't replicate that, or they try and people are too busy, they don't want to buy in.
Well, the cost is too high.
The cost is too high, both time cost and relational costs, money costs.
Yeah.
It is. It like genuinely is costly in all of those things. And you get back to this whole idea of costly discipleship of, positive Christian culture is going to be costly at some level. Now, it doesn't say you must, the only expression is to make people broke by sending them on a weekend away. But it just, the thought, I won't do this because it's costly, is a very late 20th century, early 21st century idea of if something's costly, it's not worth doing. And I think part of what Bonhoeffer challenges us with, that obviously Jesus challenges us with, is that, no, like, cost is not inherently bad. In fact, cost can be genuinely good. And to put in a cost and to make things, not intentionally make things hard, but to put effort in, is you end up on the other side with something more positive and better. When you've actually counted the cost, you've considered the cost, and you go for it anyway.
Yeah, I think maybe to wrap up the episode is that anything of value comes at a price. Yeah. That's a saying that I've heard before.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. And I think what Bonhoeffer's talking about, what Jesus did.
Yeah. I mean, this is Jesus' little parables about the treasure in the field, right? And the pearl of great price. And the pearl of great price, the pearl merchant is looking around and he finds the most perfect, the most beautiful pearl. And it says, in his joy, he went out and sold everything in order to buy the pearl. And we often think about sacrifices. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to give up all this stuff. It's so hard and it's begrudging and like blah, blah. And that's not how that parable plays out. It's in his joy. Like he joyfully gives up everything else in order to achieve the pearl, which is the kingdom of God in the parable. And what we're doing when we create positive cultural moments is creating it a joy to buy into those. And you know, obviously they're much less than the kingdom of God, but they can be symbolic of that, or they can be little mirrors of that. In the 90s, I thought it was a great joy to not know what the latest Green Day album was, because I knew what the latest OC Supertones album was. Right. That was a joy for me. I didn't care what most of the people in my class were listening to. I had no idea who the bands that they were listening. I mean, I kind of did because they were on Triple M, but really it was a great joy to have this little underground pocket of Christian punk, rock, hardcore ska bands who just celebrated being Jesus, like being friends with Jesus. And I didn't think I was hard done by not knowing the latest, top 20 or the latest hot band from Triple J. Like, you could go, I suppose I'm just going to put up with the Christian music because, I have to listen to Christian music, but I really wish I was listening to Nirvana. It's like, no, I didn't care what Blink-182 were doing, because I had bands that I was choosing not to purchase those albums by purchasing these albums. And these albums were shaping me as a disciple of Jesus. It's like, I think it's a great joy to not be saving up for a Fiji holiday, because every year we commit to going a week away. It's a massive joy. Love it. And I think that's, but if we try and create these cultural goods, if we just suddenly say to our church, all right, we're going a week away and everyone's going to love it, yes, you're going to have a lot of grumbling and a lot of complaining, and because there's a heart attitude there. And this is one of the conversations I had with my friend over the phone about Saturday nights is Saturday nights might work, but it's not about the structure of a Saturday night. That's just a practice. And there's lots of different practices that you can have. The key is the heart change. If you've got a group of people for whom they can think of no better thing to do with their whatever time you pick than to come together as God's people, to meet around his word and to spend time, genuine long periods of time with each other. If you've got that, doesn't matter what time you meet. You could say 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and if you had that heart of people, they'd be all for it. And this is what you find in the underground church in China, right? They're persecuted minorities. They can only meet at really obscure times and really hard to get to places. And it's a joy for them to go and meet at those times. Now, we don't have persecution. We've just got iPhones. We've just got full calendars. We've just got, Netflix series. Oh, I've got to binge the next 20 episodes of such and such. That's what's stopping us. And if you can't break through people's concept of that, if Jesus doesn't help shape their heart towards seeing gathering together as his people as a joy far better than anything you could possibly give up, then it doesn't really matter what time. You could say 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, you could say 6 p.m. on a Sunday night, you could say 5 o'clock on a Saturday night. What you need is people who love Jesus and love his people enough to sacrifice their everything else to be. And when you've got those early adopters, that's what's going to start the grassroots movement. Or maybe not.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what I'm hearing is like the cost that comes, willing to accept the cost that comes from the genuine joy that the gospel brings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good way to finish. Thank you very much, Tim.
Pleasure, Joel.
It was fun.
It was really fun.
I really enjoyed it. It's cool talking about all that music stuff.
Yeah.
It's fun. Thank you everyone listening or watching as well. If you have any questions or comments, you can chuck them on our YouTube channel, or you can send me an email at joel@shockersorber.com.au, and I will definitely reply, and we'll bring the question on the podcast as well. So
excellent. Looking forward to it.
Yes, look forward to it. Thank you for everyone listening. Thank you again to Tim. And as always, we finish with one way.
One way.
One way.